Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to your second official week of classes in COMM 1270 Analysis of Argument. I hope that you had a great first week, and it was really great to get to know each of you through your introductions last week, as well as read your intro course activities. I think a lot of you are talking about some really significant topics and starting to think about how argumentation might relate to those, which is awesome. For this week, this is our chance to really delve into the textbook. So we're asking you to read the first chapter. If you have not received the textbook already, there's a free digital scan of the first chapter that I've attached to this announcement. Remember as well that you should purchase an ebook if you can. Those generally run for about $35 or so if you rent them for the semester. There are also some physical copies that are still available in the bookstore. I checked a few days ago, so make sure to grab one if you can, since you'll need those for the chapters that start next week. Also remember that you have two main assignments this week. The first is your Chapter 1 activity. You should make sure that you've read the first chapter before you do this activity, and it's due by Wednesday at midnight. The second is the first reading quiz, which is due by Friday at midnight. With that being said, let's dive into the first chapter. For these videos, I'm going to try to focus on giving more examples and more explanation to try to clarify some of the concepts and key terms that the textbook talks about. So, one of the biggest things that's talked about in the first chapter is adherence. So for instance, if I told you you should take COMM 1270, then I would ultimately be seeking adherence because I want you to adhere to or agree to take that class. I want you to take a particular action. So the goal of me trying to convince you is to get you to take the class. Now you, in this instance, are a decision maker. You're the one that's making the decision on whether or not to take 1270 or a different class. So the decision maker is the one who ultimately gets to act on the issue that's being discussed. Additionally, the chapter talks about a claim. So you should take COMM 1270 is a claim. It's specifically saying what I want you to act on or what I want you to support. So in this instance, I'm making a claim for which I want you as a decision maker to seek adherence. Now, there are three major types of claims, and knowing the difference between these three is really important because they can sometimes get mixed up a lot. The first is a claim of fact. A claim of fact might be something like, the sky is blue, or seagulls really like eating breadcrumbs, or something like that, right? So a claim of fact says something that is true or potentially true about the world. And next you have a claim of value. So if you think about a value, for instance, like justice or the goodness or badness of things, then this type of claim is talking about those things. So for instance, right, something like abortion is wrong or right, or something like the Supreme Court is a just check on the government, or something like, for instance, cats are better than dogs. All of those things are including value judgments. Something is better, something is just, something is right or wrong, and the usage of those values in making claims makes them value claims. The third and the final type of claim is a policy claim. The best way to think about a policy claim is that it's like a prescription. It's telling a specific actor to engage in a specific action. So for instance, the United States federal government should repeal and replace the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. That's an example of a policy claim, because it's saying the U.S. federal government, an actor, should take an action, repealing and replacing the ACA. Another claim of policy that you might hear is the United States federal government should significantly increase its support for disaster aid or hurricane relief. Obviously an important topic right now. So that's an example of a policy claim. While a value claim is telling you what you should believe, and a fact claim is telling you what is true, a policy claim is generally saying what somebody should do, and policy claims of the three are generally the most specific. You also see in the textbook a discussion about an issue. So the issue, or the area of discussion, is kind of the topic in which people engage in and talk about a particular area of debate. So a lot of you identified particular issues surrounding, for instance, capitalism versus socialism, or surrounding things like the death penalty, animal testing, and all sorts of things. Those are various issues that have a variety of different sides that might make different claims. So a proposition is generally giving some sort of claim that asks people to reject or accept something. So the example the textbook gives is about protecting animals in laboratories. Another example might be replacing and repealing the Affordable Care Act, as mentioned, right? So it's saying a specific action of policy that somebody might support or reject. It can be factor value as well, but is generally most commonly seen under policy. Then we see support. Support then consists of claims and things that ultimately support or back up the main arguments that's being made. So we'll talk a lot more in later chapters about types of support. Some of the ones that you should think about are evidence. So in some of your articles and videos, as well as photos, you found evidence or statistical data, empirics, and other things that showed why somebody's claim was correct or incorrect. You see that values, right, supporting, for instance, the freedom of expression is something you see used a lot in terms of arguments. Speaking of arguments, the textbook talks about arguments as a claim and its support, right? So an argument is not just a claim. It's not just me saying the sky is blue. It would be me saying the sky is blue because when you look up in the sky, you see that the sky is blue because spectrums and reflections of color. I'm not a science person, so I don't know the nitty-gritty behind that, but right, there's support for that claim, and that makes it an argument. Now, an argumentation also functions as criticism of claims that other people might make. So one thing that we'll talk a lot about more is refutation, or answering claims that people make that might be correct or that you're ultimately trying to refute. You also see a discussion about criteria. So as a decision maker, what are you trying to do? What decisions are you trying to make, and how do you make them? So criteria kind of assesses how decision makers make decisions. So maybe a business decides, I want to do the thing that makes us the most money. For you, it might be, I want the class that best helps me fulfill my degree, or the classes that I find the most interesting or proximal to me. So criteria is the way in which the decision maker is trying to decide whether to act on something. And making claims and support that fit the criteria of the decision maker is really important. Because if you show them, given what you care about, here's why you should believe this or agree with me, then you're in a really good position. So, right, when we're making decisions, we deal with things like uncertainty all the time. So you don't necessarily know what COMM 1270 is going to be like. You don't know what it might be like to take another class. You don't know what might happen over the course of the semester, right? So you're trying to deal with that uncertainty and make a decision. The goal then of somebody in argumentation is to manage that and say, even though we don't know what's going to happen for sure, we can probably guess that taking argumentation is a good class for you and is helpful. So that kind of engages in a process of what the textbook calls critical thinking, or thinking about the ways in which you relate to society, right? So critical thinking and thinking about how you play into those things is really important because at that level, you're thinking, how does taking argumentation relate to my degree, relate to receiving a job, relate to my ability to live and function in society? Right? So critical thinking really tries to engage in that process. Now, one of the things that's also talked about in the textbook is rhetoric versus dialectic. And this goes back to folks like Aristotle and Socrates, if you've ever read anything by them. So rhetoric, you often hear, oh, that's just rhetoric all the time. Rhetoric is fundamentally about persuasion. It's about conveying arguments in a way that's designed to change and modify beliefs. So if we think back to the Greeks and the Romans, then we think back to argumentation as what was being criticized as making the weaker argument the stronger, making arguments for the sake of it, rather than for pursuing something like truth. Meanwhile, dialectic is more about conversation and face-to-face exchanges that aren't necessarily about arguing as much as they are about learning, right? If you have a really good friend that you talk to all the time, then you're probably engaging in dialectic. If you're trying to write a persuasive paper, then you're probably engaging in rhetoric. And so the difference between those two things is really important. Next, I really want to talk about spheres because they're really important to this chapter. So think about a sphere like an actual sphere. There are kind of arenas in which argumentation takes place. So there are three main types of spheres. First, you have the private or the personal sphere. And that constitutes your own decisions, right? So deciding internally, am I going to take this class? Should I eat a pizza or a salad, right? Those types of decisions, as well as your family, your friends, those close to you. It's a small sphere in which you might make arguments, engage in debate, and so forth. The second type of sphere is the technical sphere. A technical sphere is a much more specialized and exclusive field. So for instance, right, if you work with a company or business and you're holding a business meeting, then that is a technical sphere because not everybody can go into it, but it's not completely personal either. Congress is an example of another technical sphere because they debate and deliberate over topics themselves. Even though they're elected by the people, not everybody can just easily participate in there, right? You need to be a senator or a representative to participate in Senate or House committees and hearings and all of that stuff. And finally, you have the big public sphere. And that's the big arena of argumentation in which you can engage and talk about the issues of the day. So you see this all the time in terms of internet and social media and a lot of big issues where people talk about those things in public. They're engaging in that sphere. One of the things that will be talked about later is the emergence of the public screen. So rather than the public sphere being a place where people talk about and debate in person, we've seen a rise in that happening through online forums and settings. So that's something that we'll be talking about a bit more as well. So, those are some things to think about for the chapter. I think audience is important as well, to whom you're speaking, right? And that fits with decision makers as well. So those are some fundamental things to know for this chapter. I think knowing the different types of claims and the different types of spheres in which argumentation takes place, as well as the elements of argumentation, including what is a claim, what is an issue, and being able to define those things from each other, right? So being able to differentiate a claim of value from a claim of policy is really important. I think with this degree of fundamental work in Chapter 1, you set yourself up really well for the later chapters that will get into some of the details about that information a lot more heavily. All right, I will see you all next week, but please contact me if you have any questions or there's anything you need from me. Bye.